It's become a tradition at Hack in Paris to talk about things that are unpopular. We've heard a lot of technical talk. We've heard a lot of social talk, but we're going to get into something that is hopefully going to be a little bit controversial. The issue of fake news as it affects security. We have our three panelists. We invited Donald Trump, but he declined to come. So we have somebody to replace him, and I'll introduce them in a moment. When we talk about fake news, when we talk about the media, what is it that we're really talking about? So example, is this real or fake? Show of hands that it's real. Show of hands that it's fake. Do you know for sure what it is? Fake news has been part of our history for 2,000 years in the political realm. It actually became part of the Nazi propaganda machine very recently. And propaganda is a part, potentially, of fake news, as we're going to hear from some of our panelists on this. Was this true or false? Is this real or fake? And we go through all of these kinds of things in the political sphere, and we're trying to make informed political decisions no matter where we are in the world and to find out what is real. The question is that we're not going to be doing politics today at all. We're going to be doing the effects on our industry as to what is real and what is not real, and how it affects us operationally, how it affects vendors, how it affects users. What is real, what is not real? In this case, it was a mixture of politics and technology. We tend to be a headline society, and we all have our friends. Well, I saw it in the news. Well, they read the first headline and they made an informed opinion based upon a headline. And unfortunately, we have an entire society that is addicted to this because the art of reading has disappeared, in my opinion. Was this real? Did Yahoo have 500 million user accounts? Fake or real? Let me see. Show of hands that it's real. Fake? And a lot of I don't frickin' knows I can see out there. Is FireEye and Microsoft, are they going to war in some way? The issue of propaganda is going to come up. Did FBI Director Comey really say this? Or did he not? It certainly looks like his Twitter account. But how do we know? And this is partially what we're going to be talking about, is the effects of social media. Did Twitter really get this going on? Did this really happen? Did this attack really come up? And was it a dishonest startup using fake news in order to gain some media attention and gain traction in the IT security industry by blaming another vendor with something that was true or not? I don't know the answer on this. Who really does? How do we find out? Facebook is allegedly now going after fake news. And are we going to have algorithms? Are we going to have humans? How are we going to do this? Did Tim Cook resign yesterday or not because he thinks Apple is passé, that it's never going to invent again? So these are some of the issues that we're going to be talking about. And our three panelists will be introducing themselves, but very briefly. In the middle is Annie Moshe, and we're going to use the term British MI5 whistleblower. Is that pretty close? And whistleblowing has become another word recently in the political realm, but it also has a huge potential impact in our industry, IT and security, and we'll be talking about and questioning whether it is a legitimate means of protest, disclosure, and this is where you come in, because the questions are going to have to be coming from you. What matters to you? What do you think? You let us know. On the far right, my left, your right, it's Michael Masucci, and he is a Hollywood film producer, a lawyer, and lots of other crazy stuff. And fairness be told, I've known him for 51 years, I think it is. We actually went to high school together, and reconnected about 10 years ago, which has been great. And on him, the guy drinking the wine already. All right, what you need to do is realize that Daryl is role-playing because Donald Trump would not show up. We couldn't get anybody from the NSA to show up. But there are certain opinions that are fomented in governments in our country, around the world, that are different than the opinions that I'm sure I'm going to be hearing coming from Mike and Annie. Corporate positions about privacy, about disclosure. And with that, the format is going to be pretty straight ahead. Each of the panelists are going to have a few minutes to set up their positions, describe themselves, describe the positions, where they're coming from, because part of the goal of these types of debates at Hack in Paris is not only to have the same people talk about security shit all the time. Getting people from outside of our industry who look at our industry, are intrigued by it, but are not part of it, is going to help give us collectively a different set of inputs, a different set of ideas, a different way for us to be able to communicate these ideas, perhaps in new words that'll communicate better, especially to management people who have no idea what we're doing half of the time when we're touching their boxes. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin with Annie, because Annie has no slides, and then we're going to go with Mike, and then with Daryl, and we're going to hand over the control to Olivier down here, who has a completely authorized weapon system he got through Disney Security, and he will be the timekeeper. And part of the exercise here is for the panelists to be able to state positions very succinctly in a prescribed time limit. But I want you guys to know it is your debate, it is your panel discussion, your questions, your viewpoints are just as valid as what is going on up here, because right now none of us are 100% sure of what we're doing with regards to something that is emerging very, very quickly around the globe, and I'm sure you're going to hear has a potential great danger not only to our industry, but news, information, dissemination, and distribution in general. So with that, Annie, your 4 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Win, for inviting me yet again, and for that very kind introduction. As you mentioned, my name is Annie Machon, and in the 1990s, I worked for the British Security Service, MI5, before resigning to help my former partner and colleague, a man called David Shayler, blow the whistle on a whole series of spy crimes. We resigned and we went public, and we knew that by doing so, we would face prosecution automatically. So we fled the country, we went on the run around Europe, and then lived in exile in France, strangely enough. They gave us shelter and asylum, so thank you, France, for 3 years. He then returned in order to face trial. He did that voluntarily, and of course was convicted and went to prison. However, it was very interesting to see the reporting around the trial, and this is the first example I had of experiencing fake news, because the formal ruling at the end of the trial was that Mr. Shayler had done what he'd done in the public interest, there was no financial motivation, and that no agent lives were being put at risk. And I saw the journalists writing this down. So imagine my surprise, the next day all the front pages were saying, Shayler sells agent lives down the river for money. I was thinking, where the hell did that come from? So I started researching this, talking to my journalist contacts, and came to the conclusion of a combination of soft and hard power that the spies use to manipulate what we read in our news. And I've spoken at investigative journalist conferences across Europe over the years, and haven't yet met one journalist who has disagreed with my analysis. So where does that leave us now in the modern era of fake news, which of course is all over the news at the moment, ironically? I do a lot of media commentary for all sorts of different TV stations, BBC, Channel 4, ITV, Sky, and RT.com, the Russian English-speaking news channel. And it's only that one, when I appear on it, I'm accused of being a propagandist. And that has accelerated over the last year. And I sort of wonder why. And there was a very influential group called the Henry Jackson Society, transatlantic think tank, which is evil. It's been promoting Islamophobia in the UK for over a decade. And they, last year, unleashed a new report, which was called Putin's Useful Idiots. analysing how people who challenge the Washington consensus and speak up on behalf of Russia occasionally if they feel it's right, are therefore agents of influence and idiots and propagandists. And this view seems to have really taken off, particularly during Russiagate over the last year and the so-called hacking of the American elections, about which I will probably touch on more later. But it's interesting as well that that has produced fake news itself. Most notably, the infamous Prop or Not blacklist of alternative news sites, which was published in the Washington Post, and also the fake story about Russia hacking the American energy grid, which turned out to be entirely false. Both these stories appeared in the Washington Post, which used to be a newspaper of note. And yet, suddenly they're just shooting their reputation down in tatters by reporting this fake news. So my very final point on this is to suggest there might be a correlation between its new owner and why they are becoming the mouthpiece of the CIA. And it's interesting that in 2013, Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon and one of the world's richest people, bought the Washington Post for a reported $250 million. In that very same year, Amazon also got the deal with the CIA to develop their cloud system for a reported fee of $600 million over a 10-year period. That has been so successful, all 16 other American intelligence agencies are now working with Amazon. So God knows how much money Bezos is getting for this deal. So I would just say it's an interesting coincidence that the Washington Post seems to be the main channel of this disinformation, this fake news coming out about the Trump election and Russiagate. I'm not making any allegations, I'm not saying there's causation, but it's very interesting correlation, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Let's hear it for her. Mike, if you would come on up here, and he's a Hollywood guy, so bear with him a little bit.
Yeah, I live in Hollywood, but my aesthetics are in the downtown art worlds of around the world. Berlin, Tokyo, Paris, London. Weaponized words. Boy, that's a pretentious and highfalutin concept. But is it that new a concept? In 1839, a British playwright writing about a French cardinal, little apropos for us speaking English in France today, had a statement: the pen is mightier than the sword. This is today's pen. It makes sounds, it makes imagery, and it connects. And less of what we know about it can we really decide is real or not. Everything we have heard at this conference, every conversation you have, every joke you tell, every pickup line you give somebody at a bar is a story. Some of those stories are true, but more and more we have come to the point where it is impossible. We simply, as individuals, do not have the skill sets to dig deep enough, wide enough, or ascertain all of the information it needs to know whether anything you're hearing is 70% right, 40% right, but you more and more can be assured it's not 100% right. There may or may not be anywhere coming back from that. We may now be in a world where, not like in the 60s when Wynn and I were 3 years old, there was a group called the Firesign Theater, a comedy group, and they said everything you know is wrong. Well, everything you know is wrong. Yes, you have skills. Yes, you have techniques. Yes, you can predict. But Ptolemy in ancient Egypt was very, very good at predicting star motion and planetary motion. But all of the premises he based those predictions on were wrong. When was it ever not like that? People used to travel sometimes for the better part of the year to climb up a mountain. Now you can take a tourist bus up to meet a woman who was going to tell that person a story. The story was versed in ways that you could really interpret it in any number of ways. Therefore, it always seemed to be right, or right enough to rationalize traveling months and months and spending a tremendous amount of your resources, maybe all of your resources, to know whether the love of your life was yours forever or whether you were going to have a male child and therefore a legal heir. The question is not what's fake, but what isn't. And all of the tools that we have set up around the world, the scientific method, all of the various legal systems with their ranking systems for evidence, fact-checking, gut feelings, I just feel a vibe about it, or religious dogma, the oldest fake news we know, where people were told what to believe, what they could not dare think, and what was right and what was wrong. Yeah. The simple fact, guys, is that we have always lived in a world where we could not tell what was right or wrong, but we better dare believe, or at least state publicly, certain things, lest we be burnt at the stake, crucified, or hanged by the neck until dead. Today, some of us live in societies where we are still exempt those options, but more and more, art is like science, and science is like art, and the continuum between them allows for skilled practitioners to be able to create images and articles and stories and speeches and presidential campaigns that we no longer can tell where it's going to go or how we're going to get out of this. So what I say for all of us, let's embrace the chaos of not knowing, but let's be an open-minded and open-eyed people who know we are all telling stories. Thank you.
And I'm reiterating, just for sanity's sake, and so Daryl can keep his job, he is role-playing. This is not his company's position at all. Is that enough, Daryl?
I think so.
All right.
So this is two great intros to follow. So, and of course, to be somewhat controversial. So when it comes to fake news, I really don't think we're ever going to solve the problem. I think it's going to continue on unless somebody steps in and puts some kind of guidance and regulations in place to do such. There's this crazy fear of the government, and I think a lot of it's been generated by fake news. I think most Western countries, they're not out to create this whole Orwellian society where they control everything you do. But the truth is, the government's purpose is to support the well-being of society. And there may be cases where this fake news is being generated that the government may need to step in. Often fake news has led to violence in the streets, riots, buildings being burned, lives being lost. And everyone claims, it's a freedom of speech in the U.S. It's your First Amendment right. It's not your First Amendment right to walk into a crowded theater, as they say, and scream fire. It's not. Simple as that. And in my opinion, it's not your right to produce fake news for the purpose of causing civil unrest. So in my opinion, in this case here, there may be a purpose for the government to be able to step in. We're here to guide, lead and protect, and that is our role. We cannot let utter chaos ensue because of fake news or this freedom of speech. And I agree, freedom of speech is important, but not when we're out endangering lives, causing violence and causing issues within society. And of course, as I dig into some of this stuff a little deeper, I might get a little more edgy here. And it gets into information. Now, information, the control of information, controlling the present, past, and future. And so this information is the same way. It affects what's going on. It rewrites the past. I mean, as a prime example, and whether you agree or disagree with me, you know, as a Christian with some basic Christian views, you know, the story that Christ, who is a known historical figure, was actually married, most of that was generated by a movie, the Da Vinci Code, as a prime example. So we've taken something that is folklore. We don't know if it's real or not real, even you know, and I'll give you that. But we've made it reality. So you can go ask, you know, average person this question, and if they don't have any historical knowledge in that area, they instantly go yes. When you engage it a little more, you find out they learned this from a movie from Hollywood. Another primary example. So moving from that, I think it's important, you know, we manage information, it's important to protect the people. And fake news, in my opinion, is a critical attack against civilization. It causes disruptions, causes issues. Fake news is used by our enemies, anarchists, to disrupt the masses, and should be managed. And in my opinion, that may be a role of the government to step in when the First Amendment right is taken too far and people are potentially endangered or injured. And that is my take on it. No rocks.
All right, we've gotten three very disparate viewpoints, certainly, and I want to start getting this down to some more of the technological basis as to how this affects the IT and the security industry. And when we're talking about fake news, disinformation, misinformation, hiding information, these are all flavors of the same argument. And one of the things that I want to ask our panel is, when Microsoft says, don't worry about it, it's really not hackable, yet there's 10 people that are anonymous on the internet and says, oh, Microsoft has a serious problem. Microsoft says, no, we don't have a problem. They're all lying. Do we trust Microsoft?
Well, in my opinion, Microsoft as an industry is responsible for the products they actually create. And the truth is, it's Microsoft's job, in my opinion, to work with anyone making such claims. But in the same aspect, people making such claims should have to prove this, to Microsoft. It does none of us any good if people like this have these claims, if they're true, if they openly publish this stuff on the internet. To me, I think doing that without making the initial effort to work with a vendor is a criminal act, and they should be held liable for any damage ensued in such things.
But do we believe Microsoft when they say all of those vulnerability claims are fake? Do we believe Microsoft, or do we believe the vulnerability disclosures that were anonymous on the internet? One way or the other, which ones do we believe?
Well, you said the vulnerability disclosures on the internet, so that did they release anything to prove it? If they didn't release anything to prove it, there's absolutely no reason for us to distrust Microsoft.
But they're trying intentionally not to make the disclosure public in order to help people. Microsoft's in total denial of it. Who do we believe?
I would believe Microsoft. I actually think people that do that are out to self-promote themselves.
All right, finally I got the answer I wanted. He's going to believe the big-ass vendor.
Hell yeah.
All right, Annie, who do we believe in these types of technical disagreements that are on the internet?
Well, I tend to have a knee-jerk response about Microsoft because I've been floating or swimming around in the more hardcore hacker scenes in Berlin and places like that for years, where Microsoft is effectively a four-letter word. But I think there is a major problem here in the sense that we know from leaks, which WikiLeaks produced, their Vault 7 cache, that there are vulnerabilities. We know from the Snowden disclosures, PRISM most notably, Microsoft has been complicit in working with the intelligence agencies. It's very off-putting, this. He's going to shoot me if I carry on.
No. He pushed the button wrong. It was a fake timer.
So we have evidence that there have been vulnerabilities. We have evidence that there is probable collusion between Microsoft. They were the very first big internet company to sign up to this PRISM program that Snowden disclosed. So no, I would not believe them. I think they've been very complicit with the government for many years, and I would go always with Linux.
So you're saying that believing the large vendor corporations and security issues, you're going to doubt them more than Daryl is?
Yes. And the reason is because WikiLeaks is on a mission to present the authentic information, the proven information to the people so they can make their own assessment, rather than having it squeezed through the prism, if you'll pardon the pun, of the corporate old media. Then, so, we have the evidence in front of us. We know there have been these vulnerabilities. We know that Microsoft doesn't patch these things fast enough. So yes, of course, I'm not going to believe them.
You will get back his drink. Just have a drink. Wait. Mike, who do you believe in these cases when there's technical disagreements publicly between anonymous users, big corporations, and there is no proof?
Until I see some evidence that has some semblance of veracity, I don't believe either of them. I assume they both are protecting their interests. I assume Microsoft, in order to survive, is going to say no. And I assume that there are people with various intentions, some of which is honest, and others purely sensational. So I can't just jump from an article to a conclusion. I need to go from an article to some evidence. And I may not have the technical skill sets to assess the evidence, and that's where I believe the greater community needs to chime in, saying, well, I've looked at the stuff and I don't buy it, or I look at the stuff and they've got a point, or it's half true, or maybe there is a vulnerability, but it's not going to affect the majority of people. I think that's what the expert class does, and those of us who don't know Python from C++, we need to trust, but one of the big problems is that the general public, even the so-called educated general public that are not IT professionals, simply do not have the usable skill sets to assess claims like that. And it's going to go down ultimately to who do you trust?
That's the ultimate question we're really talking about when we're looking at fake news, regardless whether it's in the political or technical spectrum. Daryl, you were rolling your eyes when Annie was speaking.
I mean, there's two points there. We're instantly going to write somebody off because they made mistakes in the past with Microsoft. Early days of Microsoft, yeah, they were arrogant. We're dealing with a different time.
But they're not arrogant today.
Not in the same aspect.
I'm just asking.
Not in the same aspect. You basically have a corporation that needs to protect themselves, and an anonymous that says they're going to release some stuff. I'm going to side with Microsoft because of that. Because you're talking about a known and an unknown. Just because they made mistakes in the past doesn't mean they're making mistakes now. They have nothing to gain by sitting there going, there's nothing wrong, knowing that their shit is going to hit the fan. Okay? They have nothing to gain by doing that.
Tell her. She's the one
exactly.
disagreeing with you, not me.
And well, the other point was like WikiLeaks. Okay. I look at WikiLeaks. I pulled stuff down in WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, I've yet to figure them out exactly. To me, it's like leftist propaganda half the time. And I think there's very little value coming out of it. I think WikiLeaks is nothing but a puppet.
Oh, whose puppet? Let's have the theory.
You pick a government.
Well, some people say it's their CIA.
But yet, coming from the government side, I mean, let's be real about it. There's nothing wrong with propaganda put out by governments. We should be able to reckon that. But if we're so naive, then we're not going to think that all the governments, U.S., Russia, all of them are not going to use WikiLeaks, which is a puppet, to get their message out there, good or bad. This is what governments do, okay?
Annie, I see your eyes rolling now.
Well, yeah, I mean, the original founding concept of WikiLeaks that Julian Assange has said repeatedly is that in order to evade the blockage, the censorship blockage of the corporate media and the internet giants, which is increasingly evolving to this day. He wanted to set up an organization where if information were leaked to him and if it were assessed that it was authentic information, he would put that raw information out there unassessed for all of us to read so that we can make our own decisions based on these leaked documents. And that's where the proof is of all this. I've known Julian on and off since about 2009. He's been absolutely consistent about this. And all this sort of hysteria about, the Russians hacked the DNC and gave this information to WikiLeaks because they wanted to disrupt the American election. I happen to know it was not the Russians. He said it's state actors. An associate of ours, who was in Washington last year, was given these leaks, which then went on to WikiLeaks. And he's a former UK ambassador. So, I don't think he's going to be out there sort of lying about this. So, there's a lot of information out there. I cannot see that they are puppets.
Mike, I heard the word propaganda and I saw your eyebrows move.
I think most communication is propaganda. I think that we may unknowingly be sending out bad information. In our heart of hearts, we may believe it. But without so much information, nuanced information, vetted information, it's so hard for me to really jump on board of claims that have catastrophic consequences. I am all about the First Amendment, and I actually think that WikiLeaks, in theory, is a great idea. Now, that doesn't mean case by case. They haven't basically done, in an opposing manner, the same actionable badness that the corporate world does, basically just because of its sheer size, just because of the sheer nature of the reach it has. It's very hard for an elephant not to trample plants. It is very hard for a multinational corporation to not hurt somebody. It doesn't mean it's malicious. It doesn't mean it's intentional. I believe a lot of it is incompetent, with quite a bit of not caring also. But I think WikiLeaks must survive in some form, or some replacement for it.
1 minute's a bitch, isn't it?
Can I just can I leap in here as well? Because the concept
I'm
of
losing control, that's fine.
Absolutely. So the concept of WikiLeaks is growing. I mean, there are other outlets trying to follow in the same model, things like Global Leaks, Panama Leaks, which got all that financial offshore information. And strangely, the only stuff that was published mainly about that was all about Putin and his cronies, not about the American oligarchs. So, the technological genie is out of the bottle. People are beginning to distrust the mainstream media for very good cause, and they want to have access to the raw information to make up an informed decision, their own mind. And I think this is going to be a growing trend. And of course, with a whistleblowing background, I think this is the ultimate protection for potential whistleblowers. Otherwise, we don't get the information we need to be informed citizens. We cannot fully participate in our democracy if we're being lied to by our governments, lied to by big corporations, and spied on by all the intelligence agencies. It becomes physically impossible because we start to self-censor. This is giving whistleblowers a fighting chance, these sort of models like WikiLeaks, Global Leaks, Panama Leaks, etc.
Well, one of the things that's happening in the news, and I'm saying the news in quotes here because I do not know the answer. The CIA, through WikiLeaks, something came out in the last week or so, that several hundred home wireless routers, have zero-day defects in them that the CIA has known about and is saving that information on those 0 days for national security reasons. Mike, is that a good thing, a bad thing? And whether in this case governments know about something that could have zero-day effects from potential bad guys, how do we react to this, and what is right and what is wrong?
I wish there were a credible, and for all I know there may be, and you'll correct me, I wish there were a credible, objective, whatever that word means, third party that could behind closed doors look at stuff and report to the citizenry. I am not equipped to read those papers. So I think a lot of these kinds of questions just become contentious, argumentative to the general public who frankly do not have the skill sets to assess what any of this means or its implications. I hope and trust that we create curators, for lack of a better word. And we will differ as to who those curators are and who we trust. But just as we are kind of graying our trust of the mainstream media, and to be frank, I'm a mainstream media addict. I consume a lot of it. Doesn't mean I necessarily believe every word, nor do I believe that the journalists are doing bad. I think these things are tough to do, but I'm looking for third parties who can advise, because I can't assess the data.
Daryl, I've seen you disagreeing with everything. Why don't you take this one? Should the CIA keep zero-day vulnerabilities on Ma and Pa's home products secret?
So a question for you, I didn't necessarily see all the data. Was there actual vulnerabilities released or just the fact that they have them?
From what I saw, and you guys can correct me, I've only seen the list of the routers. I have not seen the actual 0 days.
So how do we
Does
know
anybody know anything different than that?
That seems to be the biggest amount of leaks related to that is about capability, not necessarily, there were some vulnerabilities, but in general, a lot of it's about capabilities, specifically home routers and IoT technology. And we're up here talking about fake news. I mean, let's be real. How do I know this is real? And if it is
Well, the
real,
CIA is going to deny it, number one.
well, I would expect them to, okay?
And you've already encouraged government propaganda.
Yes. So one, we're not going to confirm, the CIA is not going to confirm stuff. And if we're gullible enough to believe that any current government on the face of the earth does not weaponize technology, then we're all fools, okay? This is a key piece of a good spy service, to be able to gain access to systems, exploit systems to be able to monitor and track people that are under investigation for any reason. And that's as simple as that. I mean, if we don't, if we go in and say, government, you can no longer do this stuff, dear God, what do we want? What do we want the government to do? You know, you want them to just roll over? I guarantee you, if you expect your government not to spy on people and use all the tools at their means to carry out spying where it's necessary, then your government's probably not going to be around very long.
Can I just pick up on some of the CIA
Oh,
leaks?
please do.
So this is going back to Vault 7. This is, I think, about a month or two ago this came out. And it's two programs, but one is called Marble and one is called Umbridge. And this was obfuscation techniques, so that the CIA can hack into something and then make it appear forensically that it's the Russians or the Chinese or another country.
Cool.
So then you look at all the stuff that's coming out about Russiagate. There is still no evidence whatsoever has been presented in the public, just assertions, could have, would have, might have done such and such. This is all the American intelligence agency has said. And even if they did produce, what looks to be good hard proof, knowing of the existence of these obfuscation tools, how on earth do we know if it really was the Russians or it really was the Chinese? So we're getting into this wilderness of mirrors. It's impossible.
I think in our terminology, your obfuscation is our spoofing. Spoofing an identity of somebody else to make it look like them. Obfuscation is hiding something on a different level.
Thank you very much for the geek translation.
Well, this is all the basis of spying. You know, if you're going to spy on somebody, there's always a chance you're going to get caught. It makes all the much sense to make it look like someone else did it. To me, that's very realistic and very expected. We got to remember, our country, our governments are going to have secrets. Secrets are important to have a stable government. They need to be able to carry out various things like this, to be able to spy on, be honest with you, to be able to spy on anyone. Simple as that. I want my government to be able to capability to literally spy on anyone they want to spy on. Okay? Simple as that.
There are two problems
She's
with that.
chomping. Your teeth are just gnashing here.
This is great. There are two key problems with that. One is, and this is acknowledged by former senior NSA personnel, including former technical director Bill Binney, that ends up, if they collect everything, spy on everyone, store it just in case it might be useful in the future, then they are drowning in a tsunami of information, which is why they keep missing time and time again all these terrorist attackers operating in Europe, who are all known by the spies, but are not being intercepted before they carry out their plans. And I think this is also a failure of the methodology of intelligence that we're seeing now. In the past, particularly the European agencies used a wonderful blend of intelligence techniques, not just electronic surveillance, which they over-rely on now because they can and it's easy, but human agents being sent in to report back on suspects, and physical surveillance, following people around. It's much harder, it's resource intensive, but that's how you get the prior intelligence of a planned attack and can stop it and save lives, rather than just having this tsunami of information you can trawl through after an attack to try and find further networks. That's police work.
I'm going to put this into terms for Mike, and I'm going to reference our famous Sony hack. What was that? Was that 2 years ago? I guess it was. 2 years ago. Jason, about Sony, something like that. The ability to collect information, as Daryl is suggesting, which should be the rights of governments, because we trust our governments to protect us. I'm kind of quickly. All right, yes, I'm paraphrasing correctly. Does not that also imply that they should have a demonstrated ability to protect that which they collect? And have they thus far shown that ability?
No.
Yes.
All right, who's taking that one first? You want to go? I threw it at the Sony version because that was North Korea allegedly going after a shitty movie. Right. It was a shitty movie, I'm sorry.
Well, and also going after a lot of the personal employment information about people.
And the emails that came out about everybody in Hollywood backstabs everybody else.
So, just like the rest of the world. So, I think the question we are facing more and more as a society. Now, I do not know the French legal system, so I'm only going to talk about, North America, Canada's system is very similar to the U.S. But this notion that we have something called the Fourth Amendment, we have certain protections against undue search and seizure. We need a very serious debate in our society as to whether we still believe that. If we do still believe that, then all of these discussions have tremendous ramifications, except for when something truly is, and who can really make that decision, national security, whatever that really means anymore. Because I no longer know who our enemies are in my country. I am told about all of these people that are going to blow me up or behead me or poison my water or do all kinds of things to me. And because they're going to do all these things to me, they need to be put in a certain place, and I need to give up some of the things that I thought my country was all about. We need a very real conversation. If you believe in freedom of expression, all that means is protecting the controversial. There is nothing controversial about someone in Russia saying, I love Vladimir Putin. You don't need protections against that. You need protections against somebody in Russia saying they don't. So if we are going to keep these sort of notions, then the governments will have to stop being above the law, which they most certainly, the EU, Russia, and the good old USA have become.
This is a point which references Jason's slide number 437 from this morning with the circular chart of that the greatest threats that on that chart, and I've seen that before, are health issues, and terrorism is...
And can I just say to Jason, right on that one, because what you said in no uncertain terms, as that me, as an all too typical white American fat guy, have a much greater chance of getting a heart attack than being blown up by a bomb. And that, if there are facts, that's a fact, or close to one. And I
What's
applaud you
accept,
for that.
what's accepted in society? What do people want? What are their fears? Often this stuff is driven by fears and wants. People are, it's called terrorism for a reason, okay? It's meant to terrify people, okay? So most people are not terrified of having a heart attack. So it doesn't disrupt your life. You keep going until you go, oh shit, and then it's over with. But and that's why there's such an emphasis in that area there. The goal is, again, the government takes that into consideration. Terrorism, the concept, or even the vague belief of terrorism in the minds of people will actually disrupt civilization, in my opinion. It'll keep people from going to the stores. It'll keep people from getting on planes. Real or not real, it can affect the economies of entire nations.
All right, Jason's question, can we bring that up in a couple of minutes? Because that's going to go down a rabbit hole really damn quickly. Can we hold off on that one for a few, please, Jason? I know Annie has a response, and then I want to bring it into a slightly different direction.
Well, two very quick points. First of all, being British, we have lived in the UK with the threat of terrorism on a daily basis, a realistic threat of terrorism happening in London on a daily basis from the Provisional IRA, the civil war in Northern Ireland that went on for 3 decades. We had all these discussions about freedom, security, civil rights, etc., and we didn't give up any of our liberties under the face of a very direct threat. In terms of trusting our governments, can I just refer everyone back to the lies that led us, all our countries, into the Iraq war and the fallout from that, which is actually one of the issues creating a lot of the terrorism we're facing today. On that, we had in the UK our government lying barefacedly to our parliament to make a case for this illegal war. We had that based on fake intelligence that was ordered out of our spy agencies, and that fake intelligence was also fed through to Colin Powell when he made his case at the UN to invade Iraq. So this had massive ramifications for millions of innocent Iraqis. It has led to blowback. It has led to the terrorism we're seeing from ISIS all over our continent. And I think we need to bear in mind that, do we really feel we can trust our government? Nothing has reformed, nothing has improved, everything's become even more locked down since then.
I hate to say it, but a lot of times it comes down to propaganda. A lot of these terrorist acts has taken place, and it hasn't had as much impact on society and changed the lives of people. For one thing, they actually think the police, the government are doing their best. Simple as that. Propaganda or not propaganda. If the government stands back and doesn't make these efforts, or doesn't at least put these things that everyone goes, okay, I'm more likely to die of a heart attack than being blown up. Simple as that. I believe that. But if society doesn't believe that, okay, you can tell them 50 million times, if they think the government and the police department aren't doing a damn thing to protect them, your society is going to collapse. So there's always going to be, there always needs to be some trust in your government, some trust in your police department, that they're going to make every effort to protect you from these things. I mean, it's simple, in my opinion, as simple as that. Propaganda or not propaganda, I think that's important to the stability of society.
That trust has to be earned, though, surely. And if it's been flagrantly thrown away with examples like the Iraq War, then people are going to stop trusting their governments. They're going to stop trusting their intelligence agencies. And talking of propaganda, by the way, in the UK, a lot of our media is owned by a certain Rupert Murdoch. And his newspapers all came out with these headlines, front-page news horror stories about Britain being 45 minutes from Armageddon, under the threat of Iraq, attacking them and things like that. Those screaming headlines came out the day before our MPs voted to go to war, and it turned out to be fake. If that's not propaganda, I do not know what is.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, both of you. You used the word earlier, fear, which is certainly a key component in the traditional definition of terrorism. You're bringing up propaganda as well, and somehow I think it's all Mike's fault here.
Yes.
Because how many of us have ever watched a TV show like a CSI show? And there's always some guy that can crack the crypto in 7 seconds. I can get through that I'm through the firewall before I finish the sentence.
And he's skinny, wears a black t-shirt, and has really bad hair.
And these are all bullshit, as everybody in this room knows. Unless it's turned off, it ain't real. So that is as much, in my opinion, I'm going to argue, fake news that is contributing to a problem of the criminal use of bots and botnets around the world, where the majority of the people who are part of the bots are the home users who are absolutely the most clueless about all this shit, and Hollywood is making it worse.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, that's enough. All right, Hollywood's indicted.
One of the reasons I more and more prefer the word storytelling to fiction and news is because more and more I can't tell the difference. And there's nothing wrong with the word storytelling. I think storytelling is a wonderful thing, and it's a very difficult thing to do well, and it's kept us all occupied for thousands and thousands of years. I do feel, there are two adages. The news says, if it bleeds, it leads, and script writing 101 says you have to have conflict, or you can't tell a story. These two basic premises, and historically speaking, the notion of proper script writing goes back to Aristotle in his book Poetics, which is still the seminal exemplary text for any screenwriter in Hollywood, and I would dare say anyone who's aspiring around the world to do that kind of filmmaking. The notion that conflict is the only thing you are interested in. The notion of a story like, oh, somebody gets out of bed and he has a really great day, is not going to sell any movie tickets, is what the industry believes. They believe conflict is the only thing that's interesting, and the news believes if it bleeds, it leads. They have the same formula.
Probably one of my biggest problems when it comes to Hollywood is Hollywood's rewriting history. As I had mentioned up there, current, past, present, and future is controlled by information. Ever who controls the information control those. Sound a little bit like 1984.
The book came out in 92, but thank you.
Yeah. And this is the primary case. You start talking to somebody about history, and quickly you find out that their knowledge of history is what they watched Saturday night. And it's horrible. Rewriting and modifying history is a very dangerous thing. And I think first, like I said, from a First Amendment standpoint, you're not going to go to Hollywood, nor would I recommend it and go, you can't do that. It's a freedom, and it's important to have that freedom. The only time I think of First Amendment, any stopping should be when something's purely driven to disrupt and cause hazards and dangers for people, when something's done to purely cause violence.
Let me argue here with that, and I'm going to go back because I don't think you really addressed my question here, Mike. Hollywood, and every Hollywood around the world is doing the same thing. They're making technology look and appear to be ridiculously easy to bypass by bad guys. That, I could make an argument, is a bad thing to do, and I'm going to coin the term. Aren't they putting out fake technology?
Yeah, they call it fiction. Yeah, I mean, they're not saying this is truth. They're saying it's fiction. But I do agree with you. I would expand it a little bit, because another thing that they love to do is technology always goes wrong. So the standard formula in movie craft is the mad scientist. So I bet there's a lot of really smart people sitting over here. But to Hollywood, you have to have some sort of fatal flaw. You're megalomaniacal. You're so narcissistic you don't know what's going to happen. It's going to go wrong. People in the film industry who don't like this idea call it the Frankenstein syndrome. So almost always, when there's a scientist, it's gonna go wrong. The virus is gonna get released and everyone's gonna die. The zombies are gonna come. The nukes are gonna create giant spiders. But again, to the economics of the industry, it's just basic good script writing. If there's no conflict, they think you don't care. That's why. So I agree that's what's going on, but they would say, all these Harvard MBAs who now run Hollywood would say, well, of course, our job is to sell movie tickets. If it's not a crazy, insane, horrible situation, no one's gonna go on to watch this stuff. But yes, technology is the enemy. The other, whatever that ethnicity or political system is the enemy. They have to have an enemy. Is script writing 101.
Which is why Apple OS 7.2 was able to connect to an alien spaceship with a compatible USB plug,
Always.
Which the aliens invented.
which the aliens invented.
But I mean, from that, I think that is really one of the least risk when it comes to poisoning the thoughts of people. Truthfully, most people I've talked to that are not techie people think that's all bullshit too. A very few people have I ever encountered watch Hollywood movie and see, you know, this hacking in 30 seconds that actually believe it. Now, I'm not saying that's hasn't happened, but it's pretty darn rare in a modern day society. Most people now interact with computers and interact with technology for the most part, with a few exceptions. Some later generations, elderly people probably don't. They still have VCRs that go 12, 12, 12, 12. But so to me, I think that is a limited risk. I think there's way more risk in other areas coming out of Hollywood. One's probably has nothing to do with this, but I gotta say it anyways. I think the gun violence that comes out of Hollywood's horrible, in my opinion. You probably didn't expect to hear that.
No,
from
we're
me.
not going down that road. No, yeah, there's a bar later for that, okay? Anybody wants to argue guns, all right, he'll be there later.
But you heard what I said.
I heard what you said.
It wasn't a negative.
It wasn't a negative. Annie, any thoughts on this?
I just realized, talking about fiction coming out of Hollywood, that means that The Matrix is not true, right?
No, that
Oh.
was a documentary.
No.
That was true.
Old documentary.
Matrix was the documentary. One of the things that's happening right now, there were a couple headlines, and it's actually real, is Facebook and some of the social media sites are talking about an effort to get rid of fake news on their social networks, to stop the bullshit propaganda, distribution, and creating what's called a positive cognitive bias, which lets people actually believe it because they've seen it over and over and over again, and since it's self-repeated, it therefore must be true. So I understand that the social networks are trying to do this. How the hell do they do this if we cannot sit and agree as to what is potentially real, what is potentially fake, and from a technological standpoint, you know, was that compromise real? Was that vulnerability real? Was this security geeky thing real or not? How the hell is Facebook gonna, or any other large company, I'm not picking on them, how are they gonna do this with some level of efficacy and accuracy?
The ethical part.
Efficacy, not,
Efficacy, okay.
not efficacy,
Yeah,
efficacy.
Yeah, okay. Truthfully, in my opinion, they're probably not going to. I think this is purely a chance for them to control the news and control the information to their advantage.
So it's an Orwellian attempt on Facebook's part.
It very well could be. How do we know it's
He
not?
will be at the bar tonight for conversation.
I mean, how do we know it's not? I mean, they say we're going to go ahead and control this, but how can they? When we can't filter a single piece of news, how are they going to filter hundreds, thousands, or millions of pieces of news with some kind of algorithm? I tell you, the algorithm will be biased.
That's why I'm asking the question, because that actually was a real piece of news that they're doing it, and I'm going in context of what we're saying. How the hell are they going to do it?
I think it's PR. I think I can't imagine how they would do it short of creating official news. And when that happens, I'm certainly not going to be too happy with my passport. I can't imagine
Facebook
how
is
they
certainly
can
global. It's not only
Oh,
the
I know,
U.S.
I know,
passport
but-
here. It's every
But,
nationality.
you know, Zuckerberg's office, last I heard, is still up in the Bay Area. So companies can call themselves multinational, and of course their reach is, but de facto they are still culturally specific to a country. And that may not be true with the oil industry, but it is true with Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is a culture. It exports that culture, but it is a California culture. And so I still see that sort of as reflecting badly on my citizenry.
Annie.
Yeah, I just want to, not thinking about Facebook specifically, but in the UK, the government a while ago announced it was going to try and force the social media companies to weed out fake news. In fact, there was a directive from the European Parliament as well on the 23rd of November last year saying they were going to force these big companies to start weeding out fake news in Europe. Now, they can't even get them to pay their bloody taxes in Europe. How are they going to get them to enforce this is one question. But even if they could, and I know that Google particularly has been trying to develop AI capability, has been trying to get systems that can learn by feeding data sets into it. And also I heard, I think it was in 2014, they were developing a program called the Knowledge Vault, which using this sort of learning technology could then disappear websites that that would deem to be subversive or whatever. So for example, my website is, if you Google my name, my website's the #1 hit. Somehow they would force this down the hit list so that you become invisible. You're still there, but you're invisible for realistic and effective purposes on the internet. And I think that's another danger that we're looking at. It's not necessarily about fake news, it's about controlling who is allowed to have a presence on the web.
This actually brings up a talk that was last year at the 6th edition. There was a gentleman from Stanford University, if any of you recall, his name was Clarence Chow. And he was talking about hybridized learning, neural network learning, cognitive reinforcement bias, feedback, feed-forwards, and how neural networks work. And I remember I stumped him on a question that you just kind of brought up. I said, in those networks, how do you compensate for intentional poisoning of the information in such a way that the information that is coming in the output is directly created to be fake based upon not the direct inputs, but the cognitive bias weighting functions. And this gets really, really geeky, but that's the algorithm for Facebook. It's all the things that we're trying to automate that are affecting our technology. Mike, I know you're struggling to say something here.
You reminded me of a personal situation that brings up another category of disinformation and fake news, which is unintentional in nature. So the video art group I work with is called EZTV, 4 letters, EZTV. We've been around in one form or another since 1979. Somewhere in the 90s, an illegal BitTorrent came to be, and they called themselves EZTV. They lasted for a few years, got litigated to death, and became extinct after numerous lawsuits. To this day, my group is equated with them. I'm surprised that somebody doesn't say, oh yeah, you were the guys that got sued, right? So what happened is our history became fictionalized and combined with another group's history simply because people have become too lazy to do 3 clicks. They just click once. And the first thing that comes up must be the whole story. And that personally affected us. And I am sure this phenomena is happening in various ways where people with similar names to somebody who's a criminal or a pedophile, all kinds of phenomena where people have become lazy researchers, one-click researchers. And because of that, so much
data that is good data and is out there and researchable becomes quagmired. And I think that's another thing that's going on, is that people are mixing stories and they're doing very, very incidental looks into things before publishing or before vetting.
We are going to get to Jason's question, but I think, given that Daryl, you are a professional researcher, and you've got, yes, you are, really, trust me on this, and you have to deal with other people's stuff. You have to do research in what else has been done. Yep. How do you vet that? How do you take into account the biases that Mike is talking about into your research in order to avoid generating stuff that's going to be bullshit to them?
Exactly. In cases like that where I'm doing research and I want to quote a piece of research that I've actually discovered within my current, whether I'm writing a white paper or whatever, there's several things. Credibility of the person or the company, I think those are critical. If I can actually reproduce other people's research, I will do that for validation. That's not always possible, but it's really much on the credibility of the person. If I find something that's questionable, and I've often found research that's questionable. I had presentations I saw here today that I saw information that was actually incorrect. Didn't have a chance to talk to the person, but that happens to be the case. Now, the biggest problem with research is finding the data. You know, that's one of the biggest problems because.
Is it finding data or accurate data that you can have?
Accurate data, or actually.
And how do you establish that trust?
Actually finding the data, because obviously when you're doing research and you put something out there, and somebody's already done a piece of that research, and I don't necessarily quote them or reference them, then I damage my credibility as a researcher. So literally, I may spend, weeks or months looking and identifying and reading papers and stuff to avoid those type of conflicts. I'm amazed at a number of people that are very good at discovering this stuff. I had some research stuff I released like in 2008. Was it 2008? And it was like a paper was done at Black Hat, a presentation at Black Hat, actually referenced me as the first identifier of this vulnerability type. I was just totally amazed that they actually were able to find that piece of data. So that's one of my biggest fears, is the amount of data.
Well, that certainly implies an approach towards fake technological news would be, because I'm going to say the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the traditional high-quality media tends to give better references and source material. But in our field, outside of the highly technical papers, how many of us actually see in the technical media lots of references that go back to primary source material?
It doesn't always happen, no.
Is that incumbent upon us to call bullshit on those media that continue to produce that kind of material? Because otherwise, how do you know what you're reading if they don't give additional reference?
Yeah, but how do you organize that? Yes, I think that's the answer. But it gets back to, again, that notion of some entity, some credible entity that enough of you believe represents your position on technical matters that somebody like me can come to trust.
Over 3 seconds of Twitter sphere?
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen.
Real quick on that. When the media publishes stuff, one of my biggest problems with the information that's published, and as part of my job, I'm actually required to often, when a story breaks, to review the material and make quotes for the media, is one of my job. And more often than not, the stories that are initially released by the media are like inaccurate or just bullshit, just to get some kind of elevated hype, to blow something out of proportion. And of course then, if they don't reference the material good, I'm forced to hunt down the original material. which I've had to do a number of times, and find, a paper released by some PhD students out of a university and be able to read through that. And it's difficult. Like you said, they don't put the references in there, and their write-up is purely just elevated hype bullshit.
How many tweets have we seen, I'm going to say the last 5 years, that have created a significant blip in stock and market valuation of a number of companies due to some crap that appears from some nobody that is then believed? We've all seen this occur. In this suggestion, this approach, is there any way to mitigate that kind of occurrence?
Short of regulating?
Regulation, bring in the government that we trust.
Of course.
Can I just pick up-
There's some, I'm sorry, real quick. Quickly, we instantly go, regulation, that's a bad thing. I assure you, there's a lot of regulation going out there in a lot of different areas and a lot of different fields. But from IT security, there's very little regulation at this point. We regulate the banks, we regulate, private detectives, we regulate all these different things, but yet we don't regulate this particular industry. We don't regulate the information. We don't regulate vulnerability disclosures. And because of that, we have a lot of crazy things that take place.
Well, I'm going to throw this at Mike because I'm going to ask you to put on your legal hat, and I don't know how many of you in Europe have followed this case in the United States. A 17-year-old girl, some period of time ago, she's 18 now, when she was 17, she and her boyfriend got into some disagreement, and she sent him something close to 100 texts that suggested he might as well just go off and kill himself, which he did. She just got convicted of involuntary manslaughter under virtual presence, which means that there is a piece of U.S. law that is now converting the concept of physical threat, physical intimidation, physical danger into the virtual world entirely. How is that going to end up affecting when he comes out with an analysis and a piece of research that is an error and it's all bullshit and somebody dies as a result? How is that going to impact our industry?
Well, I don't
didn't say this would
practice
be
law.
easy.
I'm eligible to, but I don't practice law. I do have a law degree. It's really an extension of longstanding common law. The difference between a printed piece of paper and a web page to the legal system is none. There is no difference. So this is merely an extension of longstanding ideas that if someone were to write numerous threatening letters and put them in the U.S. Post Office and mail them to somebody, this is legally the equivalent. It is.
The first time I had seen it applied for murder,
It may
for
well
a
be.
capital case.
It certainly may well be, and it could conceivably get overturned in appeal. So remember, the American legal process kind of like never ends, except when it goes all the way to the good old Supreme Court. So once you won or lost, doesn't mean you won or lost. Just means you won a round. However, I don't personally see any difference between print and the web. I don't see any difference.
Or private texting. Any communication media you're going to put under that same umbrella.
Private threatening statements are still threatening statements. Whether, they're
Is
harder to
saying
prove
you should go
because
kill yourself a threatening statement?
It's a negligence.
yes, that is a threatening statement. Under many legal theories, saying to somebody you should go kill yourself has crossed
So
a
back to
law.
the fake news, taking that argument, which you can certainly both address, does that mean posting fake vulnerabilities should have similar types of consequence?
I'd like to pick up on a reputational issue a little bit, but in a slightly different field, and this goes back to the news aspect. So you mentioned research. If anyone were to sit back and research the David Shayler case from the years when it happened, which is 20 years ago this year. Good God, I'm old. They will find that there are massive holes in what remains of the public record online. Because I know that certain articles came out which were favourable. Whistleblowers always get, made into heroes or made into traitors. And it's quite a sort of difficult dichotomy to live with. But the articles that were written about him that were the sort of heroic ones, a lot of them have vanished from the media websites. But other articles from the same era about other intelligence officers still remain there. And I know this because I have the old paper copies, so I've got the exact date, and I could go and look at them. And they've all gone, and all the nasty ones stay in place. So in terms of reputational damage and research, I'm sure that happens in many other cases, but it's like he's being airbrushed out of history. It's quite Stalinist in a way. And I think, that can happen to companies too. It can happen to any sort of individual.
The web of trust is known to have made a lot of significant mistakes. Daryl.
Conspiracy theories.
Proof.
Prove it's not. Data disappears, Yeah, I've seen so much data on the internet just go away. Sites go away, stuff gets corrupted, things get lost. You're assuming it's a conspiracy, the whole group's doing it. And we've had these conversations at other days. Often some of this stuff happens purely because of one rogue individual. Instantly we put, a broad stroke brush across entire government organizations because of a few rogue people, and we need to stop doing that.
Rogue like Annie?
Well, I won't.
Rogue, as in they break the law when they're working on the inside.
Yes.
Well, we're doing that debate in the U.S. right now. Was Comey a whistle? And I'm not bringing politics. Is it a whistleblower, or was it a criminal breach? I mean, there is a difference that applies to our industry as well. And not getting into the political, is there a difference here that we have to care about?
Yes.
Well, then don't give us a yes. Tell us why and how.
Okay. An example would be vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities is an example. Technology vulnerabilities in whatever product application or whatever. There's a responsibility of what I refer to as ethical disclosure, making every attempt to work with a manufacturer and not just publishing the stuff out there purely to cause harm and destruction to an organization. In my opinion, if you openly find a vulnerability and have made no attempt to work with that manufacturer and you release that vulnerability out in the wild, in my opinion, you are completely legally liable for that. That means if that vulnerability is used to exploit, damage, or even impact the manufacturer of that particular software, I think you should be held legally and financially responsible.
You're referring to the shadow brokers case, particularly, where they got the cyber arsenal of the NSA, allegedly, with many zero-day hacks and other hacks available, put it out. Well, they tried to sell it, and nobody would buy, so they just started releasing them. And they are out in the wild. They are being adapted by criminals, and they are going to come back and bite all our organizations.
Yeah,
So
anybody who, would you say, were they government or was it?
nobody knows.
Okay.
I think it sounds like a criminal gang.
Well, you're talking anonymous. If you could track, if there's something been released anonymously, and you can track it back to the person who released it, they are criminally liable, in my opinion, or at least civil liability at a bare minimum.
Big damn difference in our system.
Well, think about it. If you do something that potentially leads to somebody's death, directly or indirectly, that's typically manslaughter, like we were talking about earlier, when she induced that guy to kill herself.
O.J. was not guilty criminally. He was guilty civilly. The burden of proof for damages
Big
is
difference.
drastically different.
Yes.
And in the U.S., at least, anybody can sue anybody.
There is a legal defence in the UK under the Official Secrets Act, though, which is called the defence of necessity. So if you see something which is an imminent threat to life and you don't act on it on the inside of the intelligence agencies, you can be prosecuted.
So if one of these guys knows of a major threat to a medical technological device that's connected to the internet, finds a hole that shows it can be accessed, and doesn't disclose it, he's criminally liable in your system?
No, I was talking about intelligence. I don't know about the tech.
under the
But
law.
I mean,
Well, we're here about
I know.
tech. And the same principle applies if somebody's life is potentially at
No.
risk through internet, and this is the IoT issue.
Well, if
Medical devices, we go back to the Thorac histories.
I think that was kind of a difficult, you're talking about a medical device. If I know there's a vulnerability in a device and I do not disclose it, am I liable? No, because no one's ever going to find out because I didn't disclose it. Even if someone else discloses it, it's never going to come back to me. You're not going to be able to identify it back to me because I didn't bother telling anyone.
And in the U.S., I think a lot of the prevailing theories would be if you are seen as a disinterested third party with no direct, you do not have a duty to disclose. That may be ethically wrong, but you don't have a legal duty to.
Now, I did have.
That may, we may want to look at that, but that, I think.
So I
is-
got a question for everyone out there. I've actually found vulnerabilities that gave me the ability to attack certain software, antivirus software that actually existed on Windows boxes, remotely getting full administrative access to those devices. And I sat on it for 3 years and didn't report it. I actually used it as my job to break into systems. The thing I did do, though, was it was actually fixable by the end user. Manufacturer didn't have to actually patch it. It was fixable by the end user. And we made sure that we taught everybody exactly how to fix it within the organizations that we discovered it. So was that wrong?
Is that wrong? Anybody?
Let's get these people.
Well, who said he's wrong? Who said it? Well, have that guy stand up and tell us why. Why is it wrong, sir? Dan Kaminsky. Is there a mic for Jason? We can grab him. Well, stand up and really yell.
When DNS was broken, that would have broken the whole internet, and Kaminsky, instead of just, saying, going out there and talking about the zero day or using it, he actually got all the makers, all the big corporations, all the people to work together in secret to get the DNS fixed, had them patch it, fix it, and didn't do full disclosure.
That's the way it should be done.
That's the way it should, and that's what I'm saying. That's the way it should be done. He got to be able to speak at it at conferences. He got to be able to get the press on it. But before that happened, he fixed the problem. It's like you fix the problem first, then you can talk about it later. It's like we're not talk about it if you don't want the thing. But you do full disclosure. You make sure that you're fixing the problem. You're not going off and just letting it be broken.
All right, well,
Because-
Jason, let me throw this back at you with that kind of question. In the case of DNS, you're effectively operating under an ICANN umbrella versus a Microsoft private sector umbrella with vested interest by corporate and investor stakeholders. Would there be a difference in the way he should have handled it with them, knowing that there might be clampdowns, as there have been at Black Hat and DEF CON over the years and the last one was Cisco Gate?
Well, the Michael Lynn thing in 2005, I was there. Yeah, the key thing is still you're trying to get people to fix things. And sometimes a company will fix something with you doing full disclosure behind the scenes and working with it. Other times a company is going to say, screw you, YOLO. It's like, if we sue you, no one's going to know about it and we'll be doing okay. And then that's when you have to risk, am I going to publicly disclose it and take the heat for it, and then also let these bad guys know about it as well, just to make the person patch it. It's like, and that's happened in the past as well. So once again, it's not regulating, when you're talking about the internet, you're not regulating the internet. It's not about regulating bits and bytes. You're really going down to the basics of, am I regulating free speech? And that's why it's different. That's why there's different regulations for the internet versus regulations for an auto industry versus regulations for a medical industry, because the internet is not about just business, it's communication. It affects governments, it affects cultures, and that's the difference. It's freedom of speech for everybody, even for countries that don't actually observe it. Because of the internet, their citizens still get a piece of it.
All right, Daryl just suggested, because we have about 20 minutes left, comments, questions from you. I know we've touched on a wide range of different subjects that relate around everything from legislation to fake news to the hackers. And, all right, please. Oh, I thought you were the guy with the question. You're the guy who's controlling the mic. Sorry about that. You're a SysStream guy. Any questions or comments from anybody? All right. Yeah, you can see better in these blinding lights than I can.
Thank you. Win, you said earlier that in fiction, it takes seconds to break a system, to bypass a firewall. But we've seen with Zero Day and Disclosure in the past, how many nanoseconds does it take between the connection to the computer to the execution of the code? When you got something like a buffer overflow with full privileges, how many nanoseconds does it take? It's, you said 7 seconds in the television to crack something, but I think it's 6 too much. In the real time, it's invisible for a human. The question is, on the internet, we all have something to say, and it's a question of trust. When you read something, it can be written by anyone with nothing but the will to protect themselves. If it's Microsoft, they will protect themselves. It's right for every government everywhere in the world. But the true question is what you want to accept when you read something. If you read my tweet, if you read the tweet of Jason, does it have the same credit? Do you believe as hard as the information comes from various sources? And that's the question you ask to answer tonight. But it's a very complicated field.
When you're talking about predictions, are you talking about my early work on predictions of warfare and cyber terrorism?
No, it's just we know there was a conference 2 years ago which was titled "Everything is Broken."
Everything is broken.
Yes.
I think Dan Geer may have been one of those people who has been saying that, and now he is the CTO of the CIA's research arm.
Exactly. So who to trust and when? That's the question. I think we have all to balance the information. Douglas Adams, in his book, Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy, said, "The guide is definitive, but the reality is frequently inaccurate." And it's exactly the same in the virtual space. You have all this information, but you can never know what is true. And you have to make the work to know what you are interested about or not.
Well, Dan's career is about saying unpopular things, and he's done a very good job of it, and he and I get to fight an awful lot when we have a chance to get together. But when it comes to doing predictions and all of that, and what you're talking about, I'm going to defer, because Daryl, I know you had some thoughts on what he was saying.
I lost my train of thought.
You lost your train. I do want to say, while you're thinking about it, in my early work on predictions, I made a lot of shit up. Wow, that's cool, that's cool. And in many ways, it was no different than storytelling that science fiction writers, because if you look at the history of science fiction, we're kind of living the science fiction of 100 years ago. You know, pick some epic. When I wrote my crap on cyber terrorism 26 years ago, you know how I verified the truth or not? There was a component of the US government that took a disinformation campaign out against me and tried to make it irrelevant that I was crazy and I was a human dartboard, with the exception of the Department of Defense, oddly enough. And so I would have teenagers with M16s pointed at my genitals as I walked through the corridors to give speeches and briefings to generals and colonels. And because I had no idea what I was doing, because I was making it all up, run it up the flagpole. And I'd say something really outrageous, and when a general falls off the chair and says, "How the fuck did he know that?" I know that I'm right. And so that was a social engineering trick that I used very early, before we called it social engineering. And we had different terminology for it in our day. So that's how I did some verification on stuff. Mike?
I think there's a two-way collaboration in prediction. I think prediction can be inspirational. So there are many scientists who claim they went into science because of science fiction. It's not that the science fiction book was going to predict the future, but it inspired somebody to work on that. Say, well, gee, I'd like to make stealth technology, or I'd like to, investigate this.
Time machines are still it.
Right.
That's still what everybody wants one.
And who knows what's going to be. I think where we all have to be is I think we have to learn to celebrate how little we do know. We know a lot, but boy, there is so much we don't know. We're this tiny little infestation on a speck of dust floating around a tiny little light source in the middle of nowhere in an incomprehensibly gigantic universe. That's who we are. For all our smarts and all our degrees and all our experiences, that's who we are. There is so far more we don't know or don't even think to think about that I think we need to start celebrating we're not as good as we think we are. And that's okay, because it allows for people to be inspired to go further. And there is so much further more to go. And prediction is kind of a cool thing. More often than not, I think statistically, it's pretty bad. I'm old enough to have been told when I was a kid that I was going to live in a world with flying cars, and we were all going to have vacation homes on the moon, and nobody talked about the internet.
Yeah, just a couple things. From a prediction standpoint, many years ago, I learned not to make predictions. If Daryl makes a prediction, the sun's going to set it tonight, we may have problems. Okay, but you had said one thing about people, reading Twitters and reading these things and forming these friendships and whether they like it or don't like, if they don't like it, they avoid it, that type of thing. I kind of challenge all of you. We really often have a tendency to want to migrate to people that are like-minded, whether it's technologically or political or that type of stuff. So I would challenge you to do just the opposite. I think it's good to have contention, but it has to be civil discord. Me and Wynn are really good at that. We were like totally 180 degrees out of phase from each other, and we stay up many late nights having really good conversations. And really good wine. But even from a technology standpoint, I kind of encourage you to embrace people that are not like you, that don't always think the way you do, that challenges you to think about new ways and new ideas and new concepts.
But equally so, challenge them back on equal footing, especially when it's bullshit on the internet, or you don't know whether it's fake technology. It has to work in two ways.
Exactly.
Annie?
And I was just going to pick up on the prediction and the science fiction type discussion we were having just before then, because I'm a huge sci-fi fan. My favorite author is Ian M. Banks. I would love to live in his culture. Sounds like a paradise. And it was a conversation Michael and I were having earlier about inevitably, almost inevitably, we will get to a phase in our development where we will be able to upload our consciousness, perhaps, live forever inside a machine. But then the issues around that are, who is going to own those machines? Is it going to be government? Who's going to have access to our code? Will governments be able to pick into it? Will corporations own our identity? Will they be able to change some of the code, change our memories, change our perceptions? And, you know, will we be subject to intellectual property laws and things like that? So how is this going to evolve? So I think as a prediction, it's something that's interesting, or as a possibility, it's something that's interesting. But I think those sort of questions for that future reflect back on the sort of questions that we need to be addressing now with our technology today as well.
Before we do a wrap-up here, Jason, I wanted to give you, you, because I know you've been itching and sitting on the edge of your seat several times here, and I wanted you to, do you have something to say before I ask these guys to wrap it up and we go down to Billy Bob's and start partying? Stand up and shout. You get off your button. Come on, Billy Bob.
Just one last thing about going back to the perceptions, and you were talking about terrorism and its effect on people and how we're changing our behavior. Just one other statistic that people don't realize is like how many Americans have died from the result of terrorism. We know over like 4,000, right? We can say easily 4,000. This is June, so it's like 6 months into the year. 29,000 Americans have died since the beginning of this year to gun violence in America. 29,000 citizens have died at the hands of other citizens on a gun, but we don't talk about gun laws. We don't talk about gun legislation. We don't talk about the Second Amendment, and I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment. I think that you should be able to carry your assault rifle to your gay friend's wedding while you're smoking weed. It's like, I believe all that. So it's not about the Second Amendment. It's about where our threats are. Once again, it's like, so censoring this stuff is not helping. It's like, and not changing the fact that these things are happening. The security needs to change. It's like our perceptions of it need to change. And censoring the internet, it's like watching fake news or listening to fake news or labeling stuff that you don't like fake news, because I know certain people's inauguration days were huge successes, but that's not going to help either. It's going to be the fact that you have to understand what's really affecting us and not listen to what everybody else is trying to tell you or sell you what the real threat is. I know Dara wanted to say something though on that one. It's like, I think.
No. I'm going to ask the panel to each spend a couple of minutes and condense all of this crap that we've been talking about into the final statements in the context of fake technology, fake news, authentication. We've talked about trust, talked about culture. We've touched on so many things. Can you condense this down to a couple of minutes from your position that'll give the audience some takeaways?
Yes. One, if the government is not here to control every aspect of your life. The government wants to be able to protect, defend your countries, your lives. Don't write the government off because of a few rogue people. That's not the case. I think if we as an industry and as the internet and, fake news, if we never regulate it as a people, it's going to be regulated for us. Facebook's already looking a way to do that. Okay? So that's something to take into consideration. You can be, I'm scared of the government. You also need to consider industry, businesses. Like you mentioned earlier about the future, corporations owning our identity. We already do. And that's where we're going. But I mean, you know, French, German, British, United States, we're still pretty much free societies. We have very much input into our governments via elections and stuff like that.
Unfortunately, my country has a little too much at the moment.
So in those cases, we need to play a role in driving some of these concerns around fake news or propaganda. Because, I mean, we call it fake news. I instantly call it propaganda. It's usually put out there by individuals that are trying to create a viewpoint. And like I mentioned to you, to embrace people outside of you're outside of your comfort zone or outside of what you think. Because when you all group together with one train of thought, stupid shit happens, okay? You start making stupid decisions, you feed on each other. I think that's potentially a bad thing. Again, I think the federal governments like the U.S., the CIA, the NSA are entitled to have secrets. They're entitled to have cyber weapons, whether that's to be able to exploit a stupid router or be able to take over your cell phone. They're going to have those. We need to accept that. If you have rogue people that step out of line within these organizations and abuse that, they need to be held accountable. I don't disagree with that. The United States, you know, we have a constitution. There's a reason why we got a constitution. When it's violated, action needs to be taken. But that doesn't put a broad stripe across the entire U.S. federal government or CIA or NSA when we have people making bad decisions. We're all human. We're going to do stupid things, stupid decisions. People think they know what's best a lot of times, and people in these high positions will make mistakes. Let's not write it all off, and let's realize that, you know, the adage that the government's there to help you. The truth is they are. In the United States, the people are the government. So if the government looks like shit, it's because the people haven't been doing their job.
Fair enough. Annie?
I disagree with the fact it's probably just one or two rogue people going wrong within these agencies. Certainly from a British perspective, entire institutions have gone massively off beam over the last decade. Not least MI5, my former employer, that never used to get involved in torture and suddenly started again after 9/11. Or, for example, our NSA equivalent, GCHQ, which over the last 17 years has been hacking into all the communications between North America and Europe, all our communications, without political accountability. There can be no UK political accountability for their hacking into French communications, German communications, or whatever. And we know that it's been confirmed by pushing through an incredibly intrusive new surveillance law in the UK called the Investigatory Powers Act, otherwise known as the Snoopers Charter. And in this, they tacitly state that actually GCHQ has been breaking the law for 17 years because this new law is designed to legalize what they already do. So this is crazy. So whole institutions can go off beam, they can commit crime, and they will continue to get away with it. And this is why I think a lot of fake news, so-called fake news, particularly on the social media, is proliferating because people don't trust anymore. Our trust between we, the people, and our institutions has gone. Partly, I know, because of disclosures from people like Edward Snowden and other stuff coming out on WikiLeaks, for example. So we need to rebuild that trust somehow between the government, the governed, and the government. And one of these ways I would suggest is much more radical accountability and proper powers so that if crimes are committed, those who commit those crimes will be investigated in any sector, not just intelligence. And if found convicted, go to prison because that's how you discourage future bad institutional behavior. And I think that's what we all need to try and rebuild in order to engender this trust again. That will erode this fake news, and that will erode our distrust of government at the moment. Thank you.
Mike?
Since I'm addressing a lot of people who, whether you believe in IQs or not, probably score high on the IQ scale, I think you have a responsibility. You perhaps have a greater responsibility than people who don't have the skills or the tools that you have. I know our government is far from perfect, and there are many things I will never stand by. But I do believe that they will hear the voices who are the loudest. If we stay silent, we have no excuse for what happens. I think the most important thing about the information community is that you guys and the greater manifestation of this industry, for better or worse, rule the world. It's not the generals, it's not the politicians. It might be the artists with you who really, really affect mindshare. But you guys have the skills to turn off the planet if you wanted to. I would not underestimate that power and underestimate the fact that your voices will be heard when and if there is some, again, entity. I'm not like into Mr. Organization, but how do we vet information? People who know the answers or can look at the data can vet information. I'm not that person. I think you have to understand the conferences like this, the other conferences around the world give you a voice, and they also give you a platform from which action can be taken. I am the last person to advocate violence, so that's off the table. And that also includes, in many cases, government violence. When I see the incredible focus on terrorism, I see an industry behind that. I see the terrorism industry that makes a lot of money perpetuating a hysteria that is existing in my country. And there were actually friends of mine who told me not to come to France because of some minor van incident that happened a few days ago. This is what's going on. We have to push back on the hysteria. There have always been violent people. There have always been gangs. There's always been organized crime. And there have always been people who have profited on the other side from trying to combat them. So you have skills. Don't underestimate the power those skills give you.
My closing comments are very close in that it's a responsibility, and hopefully discussions like this will allow you to kind of rephrase and rethink the way that we talk to the people who currently don't understand us. We speak to each other very, very well, but we often don't speak very well to the people with the purse strings, the managers. Why is security important? Make it important to me. And understanding things from a different viewpoint and looking at some of the more subtle changes that are occurring exceedingly rapidly, in my opinion, it's our responsibility to try to take this kind of discussion to the people who it makes the most uncomfortable. And with that, I want to thank our panel. Please, let's hear it for them. I think they did an amazing job. For those of you who will be with us this evening at Billy Bob's, I know that we will all be there. I know there's a couple people that probably want to talk to Daryl, but we're all going to be there and open to all sorts of conversation. And thank you guys, and thanks SysDream for letting us do this. Thank you, Olivier, very much. Thank you, SysDream. We'll see you later, and we'll see you tomorrow.